Hello and welcome back to the Genesis Designs and Monocraft Bench, and welcome back to the Blackbird build, this being part 3, with the construction pretty much complete and the paint prep pretty much complete. One of the last few things I want to do before going on to the painting process is I want to deal with the cockpit canopies, make sure that they fit properly, if not actually fit them all, and I want to sort out the pitot for the front here. It's too long, it's whacking everything at the side of the bench. Yes, I want to sort out the pitot, the probe for the front here. So with that in mind then, I had a look at the plastic part. This is it. Prepared to be underwhelmed. Here it is. Yes, there are still sprue stubs on it, but can you see? It's just grotty. Look, it's like they forgot to finish the mould on this front bit. It literally looks like a stick, like a twig. It's kind of lumpy and it's shocking, to be honest. So I thought, yeah, okay, I don't really want to use that. It gets fatter towards the front instead of slimmer. It's crazy. I don't really want to use that. Apart from anything else, Revell plastic, it's strange. It's kind of soft and yet ultimately quite brittle as well, and there's absolutely no chance that'll survive the rest of the build process whatsoever. So, quick visit to Hannant's later, and I've ordered this, the Master turned brass pitot tube for the Blackbird. So let's have a look at what you get in here. What did this cost me? This was £7.40. So admittedly not the cheapest, but you know, with aftermarket sometimes there's things that just give you so much more bang than the buck suggests. You know, you could spend £15 on an ejection seat that you'll barely be able to see, or a pair of ejection seats that you'll barely see, or £15 on a photo etch fret set for the cockpit tubs that you'll barely see, or you could spend £7.50 on a pitot tube that you will see all day long when you're looking at the finished model. So, and as well as being more beautiful to look at, it's also a little bit more sturdy. Although it's perfectly possible to bend these things, they're not foolproof. So what do you get in here? 2 turned brass sections, and then 2 little, I'm going to say they're probably 3D printed sections, and they're not, this bag is actually sort of heat sealed as well, so I'm going to cut it. To let the parts out. So you get 2 of these. You only need 1, but obviously it gives you 1 chance at messing it up, which is eminently possible with bits that are so small and delicate as this. Okay, get rid of them. So this part then is the base. You can see it's got a hole in the end, and that hole is for the front part, which slots into it. Like so. And that leaves a sort of a section of the shaft, or the probe, onto which this grey piece fits, and I'm really hoping that that's already got a hole in it, and it has. Let's see if this actually is going to work right off the bat. Put it on the right way round. Seemed promising at first, but it didn't go all the way through. I'm just going to do it on the bench. I'm sorry you can't see it very well, but I need to steady myself. So no, that does have a hole right through it, but it isn't slipping straight on. I'll just try the other one. Aha. Great success. There we go. Oh, breathe a sigh of relief. I thought I was going to have to drill that out then. There we go. So your completed pitot looks like that. What a beauty. And in order to fit this to the inadequately shaped... Oh my goodness, look at the comparison between these. It's just comical. Ugh. So yes, this piece then, get a little tiny instruction piece with the set. You simply remove the plastic part at the obvious junction and then drill a 0.6mm hole to accept this assembly. Now I think it's obvious that this is still quite fragile and it will still get bent and probably snapped off during the build process, but what I'm going to do is go ahead and modify this part to fit the new probe. And since there is a sort of visible step in the parts anyway, I won't actually fit this probe until right at the end, but I can fit this part that fares into the nose now and have that fared in nicely so it's not a horrible step on it, with the hole in the end ready to accept the pitot later. It's a much more elegant solution, I think, than trying to fit this to the nose later on, and I doubt that it fits beautifully, but let's test the water. I mean, I can't even push it all the way in, look. Yeah. I rest my case. I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh. I'll get on and get that done. Alright then, modifying this pitot pretty much exactly as the instructions say. Snip off the old twig and drill a 0.6mm hole into the end of that little V section and then insert the new pitot. So that now sits in there nice and straight. It's got the little step just as it had originally, and I can dismount this. This piece then can be painted, glued together, painted and everything else separately, and I can pop that on right at the end, or since this model has to get shipped to France somehow or another, I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to pull that one off, but I could even leave it in a little packet and it can just be popped in later on. But either way, it completely removes the risk of damaging beyond repair a difficult small part. And true to everything else on this build, I did cut back that locating peg so that it would go in all the way, and this fits pretty much just like everything else has, in so much as it fits, but it's not great. There's a gap and a step and all the usual good stuff, so I shall glue that in and fill it. And here are the canopies in position, and these actually do fit creditably well, enough so that I think I'll leave these main canopies off and paint them separately, but I will attach the windscreen so that can be a good join there that doesn't look obvious, and then I'll mask the rest of it off. And doing that avoids this thing you very often get if you try to fix the canopies earlier in the build and then paint the model. It seems to happen a lot to me anyway, that I get a kind of any paint particles that make their way inside through whichever avenue that might be end up affixing themselves to the inside of your transparencies due to the magic of static electricity. It's incredibly irritating and pretty much impossible to get rid of once it's in there without pulling off the canopies. If you have access somehow, you can use a mini brush or a paintbrush or a cotton bud or something, it just wipes off. But obviously if you have no access to the interior, then you can't wipe it off. And you can see already, even without pilots and even without removing the light that most of this transparency is allowing through, you can't really see a lot of that interior at all. Alright then, let's bring this thing in like a freaking Death Star. It's all together at last. So, up here, you see I've put that back part of that Pitot assembly on the front and filled it, sanded it till it fits nicely. I already drilled, as you know, drilled it, so when I'm ready I can just fit the brass Pitot. I'll paint that separately and I can fit that later on to mitigate the risk of damaging. It's not actually damage proof. Even these brass Pitots are still quite easy to bend actually, and really good at going straight into your finger as well. These fine ones. Canopies are masked both on the outside, you can see bare metal foil masking on the outside, but I also masked these main canopies from the inside and they've been painted black from the inside, which is why they're so shiny. This one is just held in place by friction. It's a reasonably, so I won't say it's a tight fit, but it fits well enough that it will just sit in place quite happily. The rear one has got some tiny spots of this stuff, sort of fortified white glue, just to hold it in place, but when I want to I'll be able to pop that back off again once it's painted. And by doing it this way, the canopy framing should end up with the same sort of colour and finish on it as the rest of the fuselage, and it's because that is another one of my pet hates, is where canopies and windscreens look as though they've been added at the end of a build, basically because they have, but if they're painted separately from the rest of the model they quite often don't look exactly the same. So as we've said before, this whole thing was rescribed, perhaps not evident, but you can see where I've used a thin layer of liquid cement just to blend those lines. We've got the control surfaces in place at the back. You can see the beautiful circles where all those sink marks were. Underneath, exactly the same story, completely rescribed. I mean, I can't call it rescribed because it was already scribed. I have simply, it took ages. I've just redefined that scribing because a lot of it was a little bit faint, especially by the time I'd rubbed out all that texture. You can see here a bit of filler was used on these main undercarriage doors. I had thought I'd get away with it, but my standards got the better of me and I ended up putting some filler on and sanding those. Same story all the way through, completely rescribed. So that is the main fuselage and that is now done, thankfully, ready to start painting. So with that, proceedings took a sharp left-hand turn and I started looking at the engines. Now, these are supplied for display on the base, which is here. This is the base. Great big thing, nice thick plastic, and it's got these mounts here just to display two made up engine representations. And those engines come in the form of 4 longitudinal parts. 4 flipping parts with all this detail moulded in, and there is a fair bit of detail moulded in. They do look relatively impressive. But look at that seam line all the way down the engine through all of that detail. The fit is typically Revell. It's not terrible, but it isn't great, as you can see here. Just holding that up and it's not really playing, is it? Because of that, I decided at a very early stage that I was only going to build one engine, and I will fill the mounting holes for the second engine on the base. So I apologise in advance for that, but this is said engine and this is where I've got it to. Now, obviously I've spent an inordinate amount of time trying to sort those seams out as best I can. It is not perfect, and I think some expectation management needs to be brought into play here if anyone else is doing one of these. The only way to completely resolve all of these seams properly would be to completely remove all of the detail around them. Clearly that's not really an option, and honestly if you were going to do that it would probably be more efficient just to build an engine from scratch anyway. But I did make a few improvements along the way, hopefully fairly obviously. I've drilled all these circles, all this ventilation out at the back. There are a couple of areas where I removed the moulded on pipe work. My tweezers. This is one, and I've replaced that with stretched sprue, which does look actually a lot, does look a lot better than the moulded on pipe, to be honest. But needless to say, I don't have the patience all the time to complete. I've just broken that. Never mind, I'll glue it back on in a minute. To redo all of this would take actually forever. So you know, I'm not going to. But I did make a few improvements to what was already there. So as a case in point, this pipe here, you can see it's moulded in, and look how it's really deep, because it has to, you can't have an undercut or it won't come out of the mould. So what I've done on this engine, on this part, is I've carved it. Just used scalpels and, well, just scalpels honestly, and I've carved it so that it looks much more like a pipe and a lot less like a shelf. I've done that in a few places. And another top tip to help make a part look more separate from the moulding, works quite well, is to use a scribing tool. You can use this kind, or actually in some circumstances just a pointy one is a little easier to manoeuvre around the small stuff. Take your pipe and angle the scribing blade at sort of so it sticks into the joint, so sort of 45 degrees if you like, and just draw it along, and that will effectively create a panel line in the bottom of that detail. So it'll slightly cut into the detail and also slightly cut into the engine part, which is fine, but it will give a slight visual separation to the parts. And especially if you're going to use some kind of wash to delineate all this pipe work, the wash will sit into that groove you just made really beautifully and neatly, and outline the pipe work much more nicely. I've done that around most of the pipes on here, on this one. But the big one, I suppose, is that I've drilled all these holes out. It's represented as a sort of a moulded shallow detail, but I decided to drill it all out. And I drilled it all out because one of the last times I was at Duxford, I went and looked at the Blackbird that lives there, and I took a few photographs. Nowhere near enough, because you can never take enough, can you? And this is a real Blackbird engine, and you can see that those holes are actually holes. And there's another shot. But you can also see that the ones around that sloped area are also holes, and that these rods go through a circular hole rather than an oblong hole. And I saw all of this and my OCD got the better of me again, so I decided to open them all up. Now I'm going to show you how I did that to end up with this result. And I want you to keep in mind that I did all of that after I joined all these four parts together. And if anybody wants to copy my efforts and do it to their engines, I suggest you do it whilst they're in this form, because it will be massively easier to do while they're before they're joined together. Right, let's zoom in a little bit, and this will be a bit of a challenge, but hopefully we'll all be able to see roughly what's going on. So to open out these circles, obviously you can just drill them out, but that assumes that you can find a drill bit that's exactly the right size, and it also assumes that the holes are circular, because actually a lot of them aren't. So to start with, take any old drill bit, a smallish one. This is a 0.8mm, but the size is honestly pretty much irrelevant, and proceed to drill in the centre of the hole. Now if you can't do centering a drill bit off the bat by yourself, by all means use a scribing tool or a needle or some such to poke yourself a guide hole. if you can, just crack on and do it. If you start drilling and find that you're not quite in the middle, you can recenter the hole by angling the drill bit. So if I deliberately go a bit off centre on this one, so I can see I'm off one way a little bit, I'll just tip my drill bit over, and because it's such a soft material it will travel forwards, and once you get back to the middle, just you can't see what I'm doing at all. I just tipped it over, I'm exaggerating now, I tipped it over, drilled, and that brings the drill bit across because it will cut into the soft plastic. And once you get back to where you think you need to be, simply pick it back up to that perpendicular angle and continue to drill through the part. I'm being very, very gentle because my finger is behind it, obviously. There we go, and we're through. That is pretty much back in the middle. So once you've got the first hole in and you're happy, then go for a bigger. Now the biggest of this type of bit that I have is a 1.5, so obviously I went straight up to that. I'm using that first hole as the guide. Just smash that straight through. On some of the holes, the 1.5 is just about there, but on most of them it was still a touch too small. So I found these in the box. This is a 1.6, and you can still use that in this. This is a Tamiya, the large size pin vise. Just flip the holder over. It's got a different size end, and that will hold this drill quite nicely. What I like about these is that the shank is the same size on all of them, so you don't have to keep mucking about like this. And we'll pass that one through as well. And that is about as close as I can get it with drill bits. And you can see that it's almost there, but not quite. And of course on the holes that are slightly oblong, it's not quite, it's not there anyway. So moving on to a round file. Put that round file in and spin it. Now be careful spinning round files in holes, especially near the joints, because it's perhaps not immediately obvious, but it's almost like a screw thread. And if you always turn it clockwise, it will wind itself through the part and eventually get stuck and break everything. So make sure you either go backwards and forwards, or just every now and again back off and bring it out. So we're making the hole bigger, just gradually. And because it's not perfectly circular, because Revell, we actually just end up filing in the normal way. Same thing here, we just open it out a bit. And then to just grab in that slight out of round. You could fill the differences rather than filing it all out. It's a completely personal choice. And there we go. And to get, just to deburr it, just get the pointy scalpel, super gently at an angle, just run around the top of that hole. That deburrs it, and then finally, extra thin, splodge that around the inside like so, and that will just clean up any tiny imperfections. And there you have some holes. It's a small thing, but it makes quite a big visual difference to the appearance of the thing. So the oblong ones obviously are slightly more of a challenge. So I'll show you how we went about that. Put that back the other way up. And we're going back to the 0.8mm drill bit here, because that seemed to be about the right size. Now with this one, I'm just locating the sort of the end curved area. Trying to go in perpendicular to the angle of the plastic part, close to it, and we put a hole in like so, and we do that at each end. thus. Then from the back I thinned the part down a bit, and if I was going to do all of them I would break out the Dremel and thin this whole area a fair bit, but just around where those holes are, just taking out some of this thickness just makes things a lot easier when it comes to cutting through from the front. Not really worried about collateral damage at all, as you can tell. Just getting rid of some of that thickness. Messy. Sorry, doorbell duties again. Okay, so got your 2 holes in the oblong slot. Thinned it out from the back a little bit. As I say, I think the most efficient way to do that thinning in reality would be to use a Dremel or similar and just thin the whole lot out, but be careful if you choose that route because you could melt the plastic pretty easily. So now I tend to find this is easier with this shaped blade. Your mileage may vary, but essentially what we're going to do here is connect the dots. I'm pushing it straight down. There's a little bit of a cut in there, but I'm really just pushing it straight down, and we're just effectively almost chiseling this material away. Be patient, don't press too hard, you don't want to break the part. There we go, we're through. Once you're through, you can then use that front edge of the blade and just neaten up if you need to. It might be really neat in the first place. Just neaten up that straight line between the 2 holes. And ensure that you've removed material all the way up to the sort of visual edge of the aperture as moulded. Whoa, that was a mouthful and probably makes no sense, but I know what I mean. Like so. You can go in the back again now that you've got the full slot there and just take away a little bit more material around the edges. This gives the illusion of the part being thinner. This is sort of just a shell around the engine, so it's not massively thick on the real deal. Bosh! 1 hole. Now, you can use the same thing. You can use your round filer or a small flat-ended jobber just to neaten that up if you need to. I'm happy with that as it is. And again, you can use extra thin just to seal everything up. Any kind of tiny loose scraggy bits, that sort of melts them in, neatens the job nicely. So obviously I did lose a fair bit of detail on this back end when I was cleaning it up. I had to, there was no way around it, and I have no way of effectively recreating this detail, so I haven't. So mine is now smooth across there, but I honestly can't see a way that you could ever sort these seams out even without losing those rivets and things, so it's just unfortunate, but that is the way it is. And the other thing I did in the course of all this, I mentioned and showed you the photo that these slots where these rods go are actually circular on the real thing and not oblongs, so I filled in the oblong aperture. I cut these away completely because most of them fall very close to the seams, as you can see. So to make the seam cleanup easier, I did cut them away. So I then filled those apertures in black super glue so you can see where I've been, and I drilled them out circular, and I've replaced the rods with brass wire. It's just 0.5mm wire. And that's it, that's the engine as good as it's going to be. I think when you look at photographs of the real engine, which I did just show you a minute ago, but here we are again. This is the one at Duxford. It is super complex, and I think that the kit engine it's not bad actually, it's not a bad representation, but it's never going to look, I don't think, quite as complicated as the real thing without a load of extra detailing applied. So on top of what you see here then you've got the exhaust parts, just like the ones we'd used in the main nacelle. This pops onto the inside, and you can see with that in how much more prototypical that whole area looks, just from the simple expedient of drilling out that multitude of circular orifices. And then we also have a set of the big pipes, which you no doubt noticed on the photographs, which fit in the various positions around the engine, like so. Make sure you get them in the right holes. I have actually very lightly marked each one of these, so that if I do have problems putting them on, figuring out where they go, I can just quickly check. Just lightly scribed on the back side where you can't see it. And I'll leave these off until after it's painted. There you go. Those on there. This pops in the back. And then actual exhaust petals pop onto the back of that. Like so. Now that plugs onto the stand. Here it is. Base stand, whatever you prefer. Like that. So the model sits on the top here, that sits down beside it. Whoop, and makes quite a nice little extra part for the stand. As I said, I will fill and smooth out these slots. I'm not doing all of this twice, I'm just not. The stand itself obviously all plugs together. It's quite sturdily moulded, it's quite thick. Does feature some excellent mould seams on these parts, but that'll all get cleaned off, sanded away. Likewise around the base of it, just clean it all up, smooth it down, and I'll paint it with some suitable dark metallic colour, just to, you know, have a nice base colour. I don't want it black because the model's black and it all gets a little bit too black if you're not careful, so I think a nice dark iron or some such will look quite good. So there we go. That is going to do us for episode 3. In the next episode, coming up next, we'll get some paint on this beast, which is going to be a job. I think you'll agree it's massive, and I've got to come up with a plan. I have been doing a little testing. Here's a very quick sneak peek of some that I've been working on. Nowhere near ready with it yet, but I am doing some practicing in the background, so look out for episode 3 coming soon. With that said, it only remains for me to say, as ever, look after yourselves, look after each other, and Genesis out.